We don't, are we good? We all, all right, Quaker meeting has begun. Thank you. Welcome to the ordinance meeting of Wednesday, September 11th at 6 o'clock. In attendance are Councilors Hamel and Seither and myself, Katerina. Approval of minutes from June 12th. So moved.
Second.
Any comments or concerns? All in favor? So that is unanimous. All right, we have public comment. As you know, ordinance is a little different because we like to get the public comment up front and then we delve into our work. So if you have anything you'd like to offer on anything that's on this agenda, if you could make your way to the podium, give us your name. And 3 minutes, please. Oh, I don't have the timer.
We'll jump right into this. Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Townsend, 28-year resident of Scarborough, 23-year realtor, rental property owner in the town of Scarborough, vacation rental business owner in the town of Scarborough. Couple of points that I want to make. One, I said this early on, the idea to have the short-term rentals ordinance, I think everyone should be aware that it was proposed by a software company. The town is being sold on solving a problem that doesn't exist. And just curious, how much does that software cost? And this is something that we pay close attention to. Jean Marie, I mean, it was probably a couple of years ago, we were at a real estate training event for continuing education, and Sunny and I were talking to you about, do you ever get any complaints about Higgins Beach? And, the answer was no. It's been a long-standing practice. And my understanding is that the draft ordinance, which I thought there was going to be more input in and have some focus groups on, but was largely taken from that of Cape Elizabeth and implements of some of South Portland, and what's used as a template. And what's interesting is short-term rentals are very new to Cape Elizabeth and South Portland, whereas Higgins Beach, Pine Point, Prouts Neck, short-term rentals go back over 120 years in those areas that make up a big part, a majority of the short-term rentals here in Scarborough. I find that the ordinance is overreaching and infringement on property owner rights. It's very cumbersome as well. For asking of floor plans to show fire extinguishers, they get moved around. I was up at my rental property last week, and where I keep the fire extinguisher, I found it on the bathroom counter. So things get moved around. The reporting itself is very cumbersome. Parking plans, inspections by code, the code office on an office that's already in much demand for what they provide for resources already to the town. And it almost seems that the town would be opening itself up to some liability if something happened, because if a application was made for a short-term rental and for some reason the town didn't inspect it within that 12-month period and something happened, there'd be some responsibility on the part of the town, I'm sure. Asking for people for insurance, a 60-minute response time if there was a problem. I mean, my phone's on silent, so when I go to bed at night, I'm getting it in the morning, or people have it on do not disturb. How much is the fee that would be charged, and what's going to determine that? Can it go up exorbitantly? There's no clarity on what that fee is. I know it's going to be to cover that software system. The complaint and suspension process seems definitely very cumbersome. And the language, I had an extensive conversation with my insurance agent today, and the insurance language in there isn't necessarily relevant. The wording is wrong, and that's going to create a whole slew of problems. It's currently geared towards commercial property, which 99% of the property owners that have rental properties do not have commercial properties or policies. They'd be 2 to 3 times the cost. So what you're asking for, you need a special endorsement, not a certificate, and it should be liability, not general liability. But I would suggest more input on this. And again, I'm opposed to this ordinance because it just seems so cumbersome. I think at a minimum, if you want to keep track of the rentals, a simple registration process at a minimum or maximum. But everything else in there I find is very infringing. Thank you.
Thanks. Next.
Good evening. My name is Francis Walsh. I'm a resident of Cape Elizabeth, but I'm one of the, here to speak on item 6, chapter 610, the piping plover ordinance. I'm just one of about 80 or so volunteers that volunteer in Scarborough on the beaches and marshes to oversee the return of the piping plover and the least terns in the spring. And we found out the other night at an event for appreciation pizza dinner for the volunteers that there are about 150 in the state, and Scarborough has 80 volunteers, which is huge to cover the beaches in Scarborough. As you may or may not know, and I feel it's important to let you know that why this ordinance is important and why we spend the hours and hours that we do to make sure that these tiny little birds survive and are able to breed and then migrate back. They migrate thousands and thousands of miles. Plovers migrate about 1,500 miles, terns about 4,000. Some of them come up from northeastern Brazil. And they come to the Scarborough Marsh area, the beaches. And as you know, it's the largest contiguous saltwater marsh in Maine. And it's a very critical part of the Atlantic Flyway, which is the major flyway for birds migrating from South America to Canada and back every year. These birds have been doing this for hundreds of years, and so it's nothing new. The ordinance is in place to protect them during this period, very short period, while they're settling in to make nests and breed and raise their young. And they're exhausted. They're exhausted when they come in. And I just want to mention, I want to focus on the agenda, but the agenda item, but I do want to mention that we also volunteer to monitor the beaches for shorebirds, which are migrating, not just the plovers and terns, but the ordinances for the plovers and terns. And the ordinance was, I don't want to say it was loose, but it had some areas that we were being told that we don't understand what the ordinance is. So a group of us, Glennis, Sue Naden, Gretchen McKeska, got together over the past year, and we wanted to tighten that up. We had a lot of input and review from Jamie Fitch, which was excellent. We also worked with Katie Foley, who's here, and her sister, Suzanne and Elaine Richer, who is not here, but they all offered comments to us on the ordinance, which helped us. Basically, all we did, and I know that Jamie put it in a memo to you, is we worked to clarify the ordinance so that it wasn't nebulous. There weren't any areas that we wanted to make it a little more black and white with regard to the season, the areas that were considered critical habitat, what things could be done in certain parts of the beach at different times of the day. And as you know, Scarborough has different rules for all the beaches when dogs can be on the beaches. And it's very difficult to monitor the areas that we're in charge of. The other thing that was added, the addendum that was added, was important because the Higgins Beach Wildlife Management Area and the map that's at the end of the ordinance is an essential and significant wildlife habitat. And it's an area that we see a lot of activity throughout the year, including now. I was down there today, and there are birds down there that are migrating. So we wanted to take this ordinance and make it and tighten it up. And with the help of Katie and her sister and Elaine, we were able to get their feedback from what other people are looking at when they read this ordinance, if they read it. But we wanted to make sure that the ordinance met the the standards that are important for monitoring the plovers and to clarify it so that there were no questions as to what we were trying to do with this ordinance. So really not a lot changed. I think a lot of it, their definitions were clarified. Zones, spaces, feet around the areas that the birds nest was all made a little more clear so that whoever needs to enforce this has some clarity in the ordinance. So I thank you for hearing this. Thank you for the work you do, and thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, Allison Bristol, 6 Bayview Avenue. And I sent the committee an email previously. I don't know if you had the opportunity to read it, but I just want to touch on a couple of points. First, I want to thank Jamie for all of her hard work on this. She really has been great in communicating, and I certainly appreciate it. And I also wanted to reiterate it, as I said in the email, I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not representing the Higgins Beach Association or the Higgins Beach community. As I mentioned in my email, the beach management agreement between the town and Maine and U.S. Fish and Wildlife clearly states, important, this agreement is in effect from April 1st through the day after Labor Day when nesting activity is occurring. When nesting activity is not occurring on town beaches, these guidelines are not in effect. And it goes on to say, there is incentive for the town to promote the nesting success of beach nesting birds as early in the season as possible. Plovers that nest in April or May will fledge their chicks by mid to late June or early July. Lease terns usually fledge chicks in August. However, if nesting fails, the nesting and chick rearing season will extend later into the peak summer months for beachgoers. This summer provided the perfect example of why the town's ordinance should not firmly set April 1st through Labor Day dates as when the ordinance is in effect. At the June Conservation Commission meeting, Jamie reported that the lease terns nested on Western, not Higgins Beach this year. At the July 11th Community Services Advisory meeting, Roger Chabot reported he anticipated the 11 total chicks at Higgins would be fledged in 2 weeks. Monitors at Higgins Beach also shared the plover chicks had fledged by the end of July or early August, yet the restrictions and beach monitors were still in place, denying beachgoers the ability to recreate in the area when the beach management agreement should have no longer been in effect. Also at Higgins, community services and beach monitors already placed signs on the beach advising restrictions are enforced April 1 through Labor Day. I understand from other Scarborough residents that signs are taken down at Ferry and Pine Point when there is no nesting activity. If so, it should be the same at Higgins. And just in conclusion, there is really no need to make the municipal ordinance more restrictive than what the state and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service require. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, Katie Foley, 7 Acorn Lane. Those who have heard me speak before know that kind of a theme that I'm always looking at, whatever, no matter what the issue is intention versus impact, because they're not one and the same. And I definitely come from a place where I believe the intentions of most people, and I know all of you who serve for all the millions of dollars that you make for serving, are admirable, and that your intentions are always good. But I think it's interesting that these two issues are on your agenda tonight at the same time, because I think when you look at them, for me, one of the things I want to say to the group with Glennis that I was involved in is kudos to Glennis for getting all the stakeholders to the table. So, and Glennis knows very well that, why she and I may not agree that this is even a necessary next step for this ordinance. she brought us to the table to work and get our input so that if it goes forward, we're gonna all be able to live with it, which I can. Like, there are pieces of it I absolutely are fine with and agree with. I think enforcement, again, is always your biggest issue, but the most important piece is she went to all the different committees. She got stakeholders involved. Last I had heard, and I might have missed a meeting because I have had my hands full this summer caring for my elderly mom. I might have missed a workshop on the short-term rentals, but I was of the understanding that also a committee like that was also going to be convened to get input. Because again, just merely looking at what's happening in other towns and then kind of adopting our ordinances around that is not necessarily the right fit. Our company, I work with Scott Townsend, we've got a lot of experience to offer, and it's just, I think it's unfortunate that that was not the route taken, and all of a sudden, there's this 7-page document without talking to all the stakeholders. So going back to the plover ordinance, I just wanted to say, and again, it was a privilege and an honor, and I was thankful to be invited to be a part of that. I also wanted to be clear that I was not there representing all of the dog owners of Greater Scarborough in an official capacity as the PAC chair. So sometimes just your presence, I'm sure what you've experienced this, you go somewhere and, oh, April's on the town council and she said this, so everyone on the town council must feel that way. So it was not a representation of the dogs organization nor was it an endorsement that we, are cheering and thinking this is the best thing since sliced bread. I think we worked with the language. The language is fine if you choose to go forward. I do think it's cumbersome and it's going to be challenging to enforce. And I thought Allison made a really great point. I will say to Allison's point about the dates, the challenge I remember because I was on the committee that helped draft that ordinance. The reason we chose Labor Day is, yes, sometimes they leave early and sometimes they leave late. But if we were to change that date every year, that would be even more confusing and cumbersome and hard for education purposes. So some years it works out well for us and some years, it is what it is, but it's a good demarcation of the timeline. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one last speaker and then we're gonna start our work.
Thank you.
Yep.
Glennis Chabot, 12 Houghton Street. I just wanted to answer some of Allison's concerns. The April 1st to Labor Day is really for the animal control ordinance so that the dogs are not allowed in that restricted area until Labor Day. As far as the signs regarding the activities, et cetera, those are removed as soon as the chicks have fledged and are safe. So those signs are out at Higgins at that end of the beach. And as soon as the chicks have fledged within a few weeks and they're leaving, we pull those signs. We no longer monitor for the activities, the holes, the games, the running games, et cetera. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone online? I keep forgetting.
Yeah, but no one's raising.
Okay, so thank you very much for public input. As I said, now we will delve into the agenda. If we could start with the agricultural farm stand change.
Oh, thank you. So this came to you all as a request in April. It had to do with our current zoning allows farm stands and agricultural farm stands as an accessory to commercial agriculture with some limitations about what you can sell and the amount. And so there's a 50% limitation. And it came as a request for being able to operate an existing ice cream stand, but not using the farm's products. And so it's a pretty simple request. We took it to a long-range planning committee. And staff is just proposing an amendment that would allow, Kristen, can you pull up the red lines? If you would allow a special exception process, then you could go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and you could talk about the business that you're proposing and how it's related to the farm business or the other agricultural business. And that would give an outlet for that. I think it was seen as a positive addition by long range because it would allow for a farm to be able to perhaps have some revenue coming in, but maybe it is just a strawberry farm and they sell more than just strawberries. So it's a pretty simple amendment, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that one.
Any questions from?
I had a
Go
couple
ahead, John.
questions. So this particular use was approved already, right? For
Correct.
on a conditional sort of thing until we go through this. Was that the idea or? was
So
it-
the farm stand and the agricultural product store is an existing use and it's permitted, but they have performance standards. And so the performance standards limit them to 50% revenue has to come from the farm business. And so they're supposed to actually report to the zoning administrator every year, their revenue, and then show that. But this would allow that to be a different situation.
So what are the agricultural products for the current farm before this exception was made? Corn? I mean, what are they?
Yeah, they had, as I recall,
the
they had their
farm stand?
vegetables and whatever, and they
Vegetables.
did have ice cream.
And there was an ice cream stand.
But the ice cream wasn't made on the farm though, was it? I don't know. I didn't know that there was this loophole or.
I'm not sure. I think that the ice cream shop may have been so in existence for so long that maybe it was
Yeah,
there.
cause I know I see this as, to me, we want to assist farms in being able to be in existence. And bring forward, different uses and put them on their, farms to help with income, and help them exist, but be reasonable about it.
Right.
So personally, I think this session, blah, blah, I can't even speak tonight, special exemption, makes sense. People's nodding. their head.
I think this is a simple change that, to Autumn's point, kind of takes care of something that was already probably happening in town, and I would hate to see other existing businesses have a change in what they're distributing and not be able to change ownership or have a portion of their farm stand be supplied by somebody that isn't themselves. And so I think being able to apply for that special exception makes perfect sense.
I could see this going to council. I will remind the audience, because I see someone trying to make a comment, but you had an opportunity to make comments. You're done. Okay, but you can talk at council when it comes before council. How's that? Well, geez, Scott.
This would be townwide, so this would
Yeah.
apply to all RF property.
Yes, yeah. So, what would you like to do?
I would like to ask another question,
go
or
ahead.
make another comment or two. So I spent a fair amount of time over the past weeks and months talking to farmers, and they range they range quite dramatically, in terms of their connection with land trusts and some working farms that have decided or for whatever reason want to remain as family farms. And a lot of these are dairy farms. I don't know how many, I don't know if we have any left in Scarborough, working small dairy farms. So the concept of this, trying to preserve an agricultural heritage and operating a farm, I think is admirable. The thing I don't quite understand here is exactly what's the, what is the purpose of, of this, the associated farm here? Is it for them to, continue operating, or is it for them to be associated with a land trust to have other purposes? And that's something that's not really clear to me here. And I understand the reasoning for why the 51% exception was made, but I think this is worthy of further exploration. I think it would be worthwhile for the council to go through it. And I don't see a problem with it going forward to the council for that, but I would like us to take the time to really be clear about you know, the purposes and the objectives and who's really benefiting. And this kind of ties back to, I don't mean to get off track here, but it does tie back to my approach to other things that have been before the council recently. It's currently pending before the council in terms of the Scarborough Land Trust. You know, I think they're very valuable, but I think we need to evaluate them carefully and make sure that they're going to be a benefit not only for the farms and other uses like this, but also, you know, for the public at large. And I don't think number one, we know enough about it. Number two, that we've really done our due diligence as a body to really verify that. So, but I'm okay with it moving forward at this point for further review discussion.
I guess anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm a little confused by what you just said, but that's all right. What I would like to know from my fellow members, do you think this should move forward to town council? I don't see what more we could do with it. We've introduced it now to the public. Now the public knows, it's on the agenda. It's coming up, okay? To go to council, at which point council, people from the public get to weigh in several points, and address whatever your concerns would be.
Yeah,
Or you can bring them up or whatnot.
I just don't think we've had enough experience evaluating these, you know, thoroughly from a public standpoint to confirm what are we gaining or what are we losing by doing this. So
Okay. All right.
Would you like me to make a motion?
Yes, ma'am. That'd be good.
I will make a motion to move the red line changes to the agricultural farm stand ordinance to the full council.
You want to second that, Mr. Hamel, or I will?
I would like to, but I would like to suggest we have this is not in the middle of the motion here.
No.
I'm in favor of it moving forward. However, I would like us to see a workshop associated with
Okay.
this and not for the council just to say, here's a rubber stamp because the ordinance said.
Let's, yeah, okay. That's council, not
Right.
us. Okay.
Yeah.
So you seconding this?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. All right, next.
Before you move on, Jean Marie,
Yeah.
Dawn, I'm happy to talk this with Nick at leadership.
Yeah.
Just so that it doesn't come to the council cold. I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
your request,
yeah.
is that we be,
I don't know if we have
Mindful.
timing in this cycle to do all this. However, I think, anyway, I'll save my comments for the other ones. I think these are big issues that I
Yeah.
think deserve the right public attention and process. So.
okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right, next. I'm sorry, I have to scroll all the way back through to get to my, discussion on chapter 610, piping plover ordinance.
I will take it
Jamie.
away.
I'm like, oh.
So I think the comments maybe gave a pretty good introduction to the changes here. Really just looking to include lease terns in the ordinance, since they are also state endangered birds nesting on our beaches. Currently, the ordinance only extends to piping plovers. Clarify the areas of Scarborough's beaches where the rules would apply, and the time frame for when the ordinance is in effect. And then right now, the ordinance, which was written, I believe, at least 10 years ago, was missing some common things that we now have access to, like drones and one wheels and things like that, that were not necessarily captured under the previous or the current version of the ordinance. So trying to make it a little bit more general so that as new things come to market, flying and wheeled things will still be covered under the ordinance. Updated the penalties so that they would be inconsistent or be consistent with, in line with the animal control ordinance. And then added the Higgins Beach Wildlife Management Area as an addendum at the request of the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, because they do kind of set their own separate rules for that portion of Higgins Beach. I also want to reiterate that this applies to all of Scarborough's beaches. And so it can be a challenge to have an ordinance that applies in 3 distinct areas of town. And so that is part of the reason there is the time frame associated there, and why we did try to clarify the areas of those beaches where activities would be restricted. And it is restricted to the areas where the birds are nesting. So we have a general idea of where that is from year to year, but they can technically go anywhere. And so we attempted to address that through the language in the ordinance.
Thank you. I have a quick question for you, before I forget, and that is, because people have mentioned this and when people have talked to me about it too. There's some concern about, well, what if there aren't any more nests and whatever, and the feds and the state say if there are no nests, then it's not. Am I correct in reading this, that we're gonna follow the state and federal rules on this?
So this essentially gives us the authority to enforce and comply with our beach management agreement with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Agency. So I would say if we don't have plovers nesting on a beach, then we wouldn't have, I think we would still have the restricted area in effect, because that's our animal control ordinance. But there wouldn't necessarily be the volunteers on the beach saying, you can't play spike ball in this area, you can't fly your drone in this area.
Putting up the fences.
So the Audubon puts up the fences in the spring in the areas where the birds are likely to nest. They're adjusted throughout the year or throughout the nesting season based on where the birds end up building their nests. It has happened in the past that we haven't had nests on Pine Point, for example. The management comes down, and so the restrictions wouldn't necessarily, we wouldn't have volunteers on the beach if there are no birds nesting there.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a comment, first of all. Hey, I'm a bird fan. We got the Sibley's bird boat there, and I look forward to the glossy ibis every spring, the side of spring, right near the Audubon Center. So this is a wonderful thing, So I'm a big supporter of all of that. The thing that does trouble me a little bit is this has been a very busy summer that we've had, and thankfully we're not under a performance management requirement, federal one. At least that one, has expired. So when I read this, it gives me a little bit of pause, because I'm concerned about one part of the community, trying to push this forward at a time when it seems like we had a little bit more favorability, a little more flexibility. So that's concern number one. The other one, final thing is, I had a question about, so are you saying that we're going to follow the nesting when nesting occurs, and that could be any time beyond April 1 through Labor Day, or you're saying April 1 through Labor Day is the new wording, replacing the nesting activity trigger?
We are saying that the ordinance would be in effect, the way it's currently written in front of you, April 1st through Labor Day. And
that is a broader time frame than nesting activity typically.
So the birds typically arrive middle to late March and start scoping out their nesting areas in early April, mating up, creating their nests, laying their eggs. It's usually at least a 2-month process, and often longer. I mean, the birds don't all arrive on the same day. They come throughout the season. We were still finding new nests. On Higgins, we had nests before the beginning of May, and we are still finding new nests by the end of May. So there was at least, a 4-week window where nests were being found in the sand. That went even later on Western Beach. We had 13 plover pairs on Western Beach this summer, so that was a lot. And then, we say until the birds fledge. That's until biologically they have developed wings and are able to fly. They're still not great flyers. They're still not really able to get out of harm's way. So just because the birds have technically fledged based on their life cycle, they're still vulnerable. And so that's, why part of the reason for why it extends through Labor Day. The other reason is because if we include lease turns on here, their cycle is much longer. And so they're not going to fledge until closer to Labor Day.
So I just like to end by saying, here's my feeling on this. Number one, this is a great amount of work that you've done together as a group. So I have a lot of respect for that and it's good work. But I am concerned about the fact that you're suggesting that this would become then applied to the entire town under an ordinance, number one, and number two, that it replaces the guide of nesting activity. So those two things for me are things that I think deserve extensive discussion and a review. So
Can I just respond to that? That the ordinance isn't significantly different than what's currently in place. It's just clarified. And the fact that we have nesting activity occurring on 3 beaches throughout the year, it's hard enough for people to follow our dog rules when they go in, when they first are changed on April 1st and then change again on May 15th. And that's town-wide. If we're gonna have different rules on different beaches based on when nesting activity happens, that's going to be really difficult for the public to understand, for our volunteers to understand, for town staff to understand, and to be able to be enforced. So for simplicity's sake, it's important to have a set time frame. And as Glennis mentioned in her comments, once, the birds have fledged, things relax a little bit, but we still need the flexibility or the predictability of a set time frame for when the ordinance is in effect.
my point is, and I appreciate everything you've said. My point is, I do not believe this has broad public support. I know there's a group of people that have moved it forward and that's how things get done very often, but I believe this needs to have much more discussion and review to confirm if it has broad support from the town.
Well, and that's why things go through the council
Yes.
after they leave us.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm a short timer and you know that, so. Let's get that point out there before I fly away.
Well, you and me too,
Yeah.
so there you go.
Short time.
Anyway,
I have a question.
April.
Can you speak a little bit to the enforcement concerns that we heard from public comment? Given what we've been through with some of our other ordinances recently and difficulties with enforcement, I'm now acutely aware of how important that is to be part of the ordinance.
Yeah, so enforcing this is a challenge just simply because of the manpower involved. So this is a public safety ordinance. It's enforced by our police department. And so you can imagine that they have many more important things to do than to rush down to a beach if someone is, has flying a drone in the wrong area. And that's why we have I'll say a fleet of 80 volunteers who are on our beaches, educating the public about what our rules say. Every once in a while, we have an instance where we need some help, where our, whoever is on the beach and is not complying with the ordinance isn't listening to our volunteers, because our volunteers have no authority. They're there to educate, first and foremost. And so, they are instructed, because, we're concerned about their safety on the beach. They're instructed that if they need help, they call the non-emergency number for the police department. If there is a police officer in the area that's able to respond, they will respond. But that it's the same with with other laws. Speeding, it's only enforced if someone is there to see the event happening. So yeah, that is definitely the challenge, is that our public safety is stretched thin, and they have a lot of other important things to do that will trump this ordinance.
I want to thank the group that got together.
I do too.
To work on this, because I know, over time, it's the 10 years I've been around and working on these various things, it's been, well, Higgins this and Pine Point's different and whatever. So we need consistency. And as former Counselor Foley said, having some consistency makes it easier for enforcement purposes and just for the public, because if you've
Yeah.
got 18 different rules, it gets crazy. So I don't know, I can't, when I read, let me back this up a little. When I read through this and listening to people and getting the emails and whatever, I think, yeah, why not send it forward to council? Because council will then, they're gonna have more hearings if they want to decide they want to workshop it or whatever. But at least we have this that we know has come from several different viewpoints, which I think is very good, very helpful. Thank you to all of you who worked on it. And should help us be able to put something together that makes sense. And I'm very happy that we added the lease terms to it also. So, that makes me, it makes my daughter happy. She's a wicked birder and she lives in Chicago now, but she grew up here and when she comes home, you know, she's got those binocs and she's out there, whatever, so. Any, other comments or?
I do think this was developed using a collaborative process that I think is our best practice. I think that all of our best work comes from that kind of model that we've set where we bring stakeholders together, and it takes a long time. I mean, we know these things, you know, can drag out, and in this case, it was several months between when we saw it first and when we're seeing it now. I am sensitive to what Counselor Hamel is saying in the sense that probably this does not have a lot of visibility to the general public, and it's difficult to gauge whether or not this has broad support in that sense, because this is one of those kind of niche things that happens in town. And I think probably the impact is low to the majority of people. They're probably not overly invested in this topic. And so it is hard to feel like we're going to send it to council and that maybe it's not going to, you know, to Counselor Hammel's point, that it's just going to get put through and we won't really have had a lot of input on it. But that's the challenge always is does the topic warrant a lot of input, and how do we generate that when it is kind of a small niche topic like this? I'm okay knowing that it was developed with many stakeholders in place, that we've addressed the comments tonight. I'm okay sending this to council for a first read and public hearing and see if we can generate more process around it. But I don't have any changes or other questions at the committee level.
I had one more, building off April's point there. I think somebody earlier made the point that it all turns around enforcement. So, you know, here we go again. If we're assigning it to public safety, you made the point yourself, these are very busy people. And in the recent past, they've been busy dealing with really serious matters. So if they're not there to enforce, then there's no enforcement. And we've seen this happen already with the cannabis ordinance. You know, there was no enforcement because nobody showed. And it's a similar problem potentially here. So I think that again is an issue that deserves public discourse and thorough discussion.
Can I just reiterate that this is a revision to an existing ordinance? So it's already under their purview to enforce this ordinance. And really the changes are just adding clarity so that when if they happen to go to the beach and because of an issue, it's more clear to them whether it's in their purview or not.
And I would just say that expanding this in any fashion puts more pressure on an area that's very likely not working.
Well, yeah. Do we have a motion?
I will make a motion that we send the red line changes from chapter 610 Town of Scarborough piping plover and least, well, it's piping plover currently, protection ordinance to the full council.
And do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? That's unanimous. I would ask, you know, that we just make some notation with it, you and I can both look at April. you know, just to explain to council that, I don't know if they want to do a counselor corner or, you know, whatever, just making sure the public knows that this is out there and coming, so we can get more broader input if necessary.
Yeah, I don't know that there's such a thing as recommending it go to the council with conditions, but it's.
It's not a condition, it's just a reminder,
There you go.
no conditions. All right, last but not least, I was gonna say STR, no one will know what I'm talking about. Short-term rental.
I can go ahead and share my screen.
Registration, yeah, if you would.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks very much.
So I will just go ahead and say that this presentation, we are not requesting that you all move this to council. This
Great.
is.
Great.
Thank you.
Just, would you clear that up? And I will also say, we've been talking about this for quite some time, but we held our last workshop in June of this year. And what I've presented for you is probably, with lack of a better word, a worst case scenario registration ordinance. It's full of all sorts of things, the registration process, inspections, penalties and violations. It's really, for me, since I'm not working with the committee on this, I'm working through ordinance, and that's what you all directed us to do. I really need feedback on strike this whole section. That's too much, or look at this, because I too have been attending all of the council meetings where we had enforcement issues. And so I came at it as a very, really a bit over the top, I think, even talking with our town attorney about it, that I really wanted direction from you all with that. And so after we go through this, what I would propose, that will help give me some guidance, and then I can update the draft, and then we can meet with the folks that I know have been the stakeholders and been involved in the process, and then come back with another draft. I will also say that the software that we are going to use this for licensing does not have anything to do with the software that we showed some samples of. The software that I'm actually going to be using, I purchased through the capital improvement process for planning and codes permitting. It also came with a licensing component that was free. And so the town clerk is going to be able to take advantage of that for all of our licensing. So we would just roll that into that. So I just wanted to make that clear as well.
Before you go, Autumn, I'll also make my standard disclosure statement on the topic of short-term rentals, just because my husband does work for a software company that is generating short-term rental software. It has absolutely nothing to do with the town. They don't have a license with the town. They're not pursuing a license with the town. But I want to make sure that everyone knows that I do have a connection to short-term rentals and to software. So if at any point people are uncomfortable with my connections or would like to know more, I'm happy to discuss. And to that point, if at any point people would like me to recuse myself, please make me aware of that also.
Thank you.
So the draft that you have is really a collection of several communities. It follows our current licensing requirements and its formatting, but it really just talks about the purpose and the applicability. It's really about a registration process to capture who is currently renting short-term rentals. And short-term rental for our process, our purposes, is defined as less than 28 days. That is in line with our accessory dwelling unit ordinance. So it's a little bit different than some where it's 30 days. But basically, this is a permitting, like a registration. It's kind of like licensing, but not really. So there's definitions. I will say this highlighted. There was some information, some uses included that are not relative to us. So I've updated this version just to show you that those were removed. So these are definitions, and then you get into this process. And the process is really that on an annual basis, everyone that has a short-term rental registers it. It would be an automated online process, an application that you fill out. There is quite a bit. I agree with Mr. Thompson. There's quite a few requirements in here. And again, I think that's what I really needed some guidance on, is how detailed we wanted it. Is there something missing? Is there something that should be removed? So this is your registration process and the application. It's pretty straightforward. I think through this process, we will also be able to identify if you are using an accessory dwelling unit as a short-term rental, which you are in fact not supposed to. That's really our only ordinance prohibiting short-term rental right now, is an accessory dwelling unit is not supposed to be used for short-term rental. But then we get into the approval authority. So right now, the way it's written, it would go through the town clerk's office. And there would be 10 business days. So it's pretty straightforward. They fill out all the information, and then it gets approved. So these are just registration requirements and general standards, how you have to have the registration shown. And then in these conversations, and talking with this process, public safety and code enforcement really wanted to make sure that we did some general inspections. More than fire safety, egress. We don't really want to have a short-term rental that's in a basement with no windows. Just making sure you have your basic carbon monoxide poisoning or carbon monoxide alarm if you have gas and those sorts of things. So that's what this section's about. And yes, if we need to make it much more generic, we could take these things out of the ordinance, and then public safety is said that they would create an FAQ that we would hand out to folks, and then that would be like their little checklist, and so it wouldn't have to be so specific in the ordinance. We could do it that way as well. And then we have these inspections. Let's see, so this is where we would inspect it within the first 12 months. And then if ownership changes, we would go back out for an inspection. So there's the maximum occupancy included. There's parking requirements included. Again, these are just topics that other communities have used and have come up in our conversations. Trash is an issue that we wanted to add in. The good neighbor ordinance, that's just for your noise and lighting issues. But then this and the highlighted violations and penalties, the first part of it is about violations for the application. But then it gets really detailed, and I did borrow very heavily from Cape Elizabeth for this because they had a really defined way. If there's a problem, thou shall. Those are the parts that I really want some input. Are we concerned with that? And I agree, I don't receive regular complaints this summer. I haven't heard maybe no complaints this summer. It's not, I agree. The beach community has been doing this for longer than we've all been in this facility working, but we did hear through our meetings that we had some residents that had concerns about neighborhoods outside of the beach community. And so that's really what sort of prompted this. But again, if you all feel comfortable with just this registration process and let's figure out what we really have, we can strike quite a bit of this. So with all that, I'm happy to go through any specific sections you want, but the way it's written now, it's very detailed. There's things that you do with the first complaint and so on. And that is it.
Remind me, Autumn, has long range planning looked at this yet?
No, so the request was to bring it to ordinance from council. We could look at it in long range.
That's what and where I'm going with this, just so you guys will know, is I agree it needs to really be gone through, and this makes sense for Scarborough. This is crazy.
Right.
And Mr. Townsend brought up a couple of good points that, we want to hear more from people, within who do short-term rentals, as well as the neighbors. So to me, it's like, so what's the best venue for doing it?
I think our best practice is to do stakeholder groups before ordinance necessarily goes through and picks language apart. I made a lot of annotations on my copy because I had questions about a lot of it all the way starting with the definition section. So I would love to see a stakeholder group kind of go through that same exercise. I don't feel qualified to just have the three of us kind of go
No.
through it. And I don't know that that's a worthwhile use of our time because I would need to know much more. I think probably background information from stakeholders before I started weighing in on language changes.
Mr. Hammond?
Yeah, I liked very much how Alderman you set this up, you know, the
Yeah.
preamble that you gave. You know, I think that this is definitely bigger than a bread box. And there is a need for it in spite of what we hear from other areas, or there's no need for it. There definitely is a need for it. The fact that we may not have heard complaints, or you may not have heard complaints, doesn't mean there were no issues. What happens is, frankly, here we go again, we're relying on a, you know, good neighbor ordinance, and 20 minutes of a dog barking before somebody calls public safety and nobody comes, and then, okay, that's kind of, so those things may never get to you. And I think April and Jean Marie have both talked about the timeline. I think it needs to be reworked. I think that, in particular, the idea of a new council being seated on the 6th, and they'll see this for a first reading, and then, you know, and then you're gonna get it ready by January, I think is really aggressive. So, but I like the way you're going through it. There is definitely a need for it. But I think we need to be reasonable, and also I like very much what you've said about trying to make sure it's woven in with our other ordinances, you know, on accessory dwelling units and so forth. Thank you.
Part of what I'm thinking is where we are coming up to the election, and there are 3 council seats that are open. So it's gonna be a big turnover on council, is to hold off on this and let the new council say, okay, you know, the ordinance heard it, ordinance agrees, you know, it needs a lot of work. And where do they want to start? Where do they want to go with it as a new group? That's what I'm thinking.
Do you think it would be helpful in the meantime to perhaps get that stakeholder group and they could just say, oh, Autumn, you're crazy, strike all of these things, and then maybe
Yeah,
with
we
the
could
new
probably
council,
do that, yeah.
like in January timeframe. You know, again, I think the timing is, the January is just our rollout, but I think, so that's not really a problem to adjust that.
Well, my little brain's now thinking is, who would we want on a stakeholder group?
Mr. Townsend.
And
And I have a few
You're
other
there,
names.
Scott.
Yeah, I can't see everybody back there. But no, I mean, that's really helpful. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, because you want people who own them,
Right.
you want people who manage them, you want people who use them, you want people who think they're ridiculous and should be banned. I mean, you want the whole ball of wax there. So how do we go about finding those people, I guess I'm just throwing that out there.
I can work with Karen Martin and we can come up with perhaps. a
I think we
group,
have
and
someone that fits every one of those categories.
Well, I know I could fill them in, but that's not my job. You know, it's like, I want to make sure we don't miss
No.
someone who may be.
Sure,
I'm
we
just
could-
referring to people who have communicated with council.
Sure, yeah, I was gonna say, we could go through our council communications. We could go through the Counselor Corner Live that we did.
Yes.
You know, there were 40 people in attendance and, you know,
And I'm
see if we
sure
can,
the gentleman sitting in the back row will help us think of people too. He's nodding.
Scott is nodding.
Could I ask for just a general direction on what you all are thinking? When you've talked about it for the
Yeah.
last few years, what did you picture, the outcome might be? That would be helpful for me. I always
Sure.
like to give people something to respond to. So what I've given you is the whole kitchen, right? And so I'd like to just know, what is the goal of the ordinance?
To me, the goal of this ordinance per se is to ensure the safety
Mhm.
of those who are using short-term rentals, because let's face it, you know, they're going through some outfit or picking up the phone or whatever. They don't know what they're getting or not getting. They're relying on whomever. So I'd like to give people that comfort of knowing that public safety at least has looked at it. I also want to protect neighbors from, it's like, they didn't choose to move into a neighborhood to live next to a rental. Unless they're down at Higgins
I
or places
think
like
this is-
that, that's.
I think
different,
this is one of those times, because it's an issue and it would apply townwide. I think this is one of those times when it's really important that the rules apply to everybody.
Yeah.
And that we, like, so for me, having an ordinance brings that level of consistency
Yeah.
where we can have some assurances that everyone is playing by the same rules. Autumn, where is it, just for my own, not for my own purposes, is it that you can't use an ADU as an STR?
It's in our ADU
It's
ordinance.
in that section
Yeah,
of
you
the,
do, yeah.
okay. I don't remember that from when
It's
we
done as part of
passed it.
the LD 2003.
No, that was.
No, that was before.
Thank you very much, Allison. I just didn't remember, I didn't remember that at all from before. And I guarantee that there are probably some residents in town that are unaware that they are not allowed to use an ADU as a STR.
I can guarantee it.
Yeah, and so I just
yeah.
feel like there's some opportunities for education with that piece of it too.
And can someone articulate why that's so? What's the problem with an ADU?
Well, that's my question. I wanted to read the language.
I'm wondering.
I wanted to read the language too.
Think this, if I'm just guessing, I think the thought was that when that ordinance was written, it was, the ADU was meant for, family or relatives and that sort of thing to provide alternative housing, not as a money-making
As an
sort
income
of
source.
secondary income.
Yep.
Yeah.
And for a variety of reasons, life has changed, so those things,
Yeah.
kind of different meaning, different.
I
depth.
believe it's been
Hmm.
in ordinance for quite some time.
So one thing that I would add to this, to those comments are that, I believe there's definitely a need for this, but I think we need to be mindful of the fact that there are other factors like parking. Like there is tremendous amount of parking that takes place now on people's property that have created all kinds of issues. There's that, and also, so that's one big dependency, and there is a recommendation that the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee has put forth. It's, not on anybody's agenda yet, but that's something that ought to be factored into this as well. The other thing I was gonna say is that I think that with efforts like this, there is not only the parking issue, but there is also this issue of health and safety in terms of, the dwellings themselves that may be used for housing people that are here for, extended periods of time, who are providing services like nursing and other specialized skills that don't exist today. That's another whole demand factor on this area. So I don't know exactly how you get your arms around it, but somewhere in this process, you'll want to make sure that you factor that into. This is totally different than what we had 5 or 10 years ago.
I know that personally, I have a concern about rentals all turning into short-term rentals so that there is no housing, because traditionally places like Higgins Beach, like when I was younger, or Pine Point, say you were a teacher in town or whatnot, because I did this when I lived in York 1,000 years ago, is we would rent what would be summer cottages, but live in them during the winter because there was no other housing really that was affordable. But now with short-term rentals and whatever, that tends to cut into that. But, that being as it may, I do definitely have concerns just because of my own stories I know, and they aren't stories, things have happened to people who've gone to short-term rentals and it hasn't been safe. It shouldn't be used as a short-term rental.
Well, I also think we need to have some definitions in place so that we're and we need to decide as a town, are we letting people set up a camper in their driveway and rent that out for the night? Is that a short-term rental?
Right.
You know, does it have to be a dwelling? Like, so I think, so there's a bunch of just kind of definitions, that I think would be good and important to have in place.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily what they all are in terms of what people would like to see, and that's where that stakeholder group becomes so
Yeah.
important. But I do think that this is necessary. I think we live in a time now where, you know, for a long time, people have used their properties, our beach community as income, and I have no interest in deterring that or blocking that. I want to make sure that
Right.
people are able to use their property for how they intended to use their property. So I just think we need to level set and make sure that we do have some rules in place for those safety reasons and just to make sure that we are all on the same page.
So if it's okay with you all, I have there's a page on our website set up for this, and I'll just put a little blurb out there that I'm looking for a
Solicit.
stakeholder group.
Sure.
And whoever is out there, contact me, and then I'll just kind of slow roll it. We're short-staffed, and so I'm not necessarily in a hurry to
Yep.
do this, so I'll take that feedback, and then we'll probably plan on maybe coming before the full new council beginning of the year and figure out where to go from there.
I think that's very reasonable.
Yep. I agree with
Don't
that.
forget tiny homes. We left that one out.
Yeah, well, that's part of it too, right? Like, but is that an ADU?
Yeah,
Like,
the
what-
way we have it now is it's a legally existing dwelling, right? So,
Don't muddy the
Right.
water.
thank you.
Great. All right. Scott, you must have a card somewhere you can give to the planner. right?
Yeah, speaking on.
Okay. Future agenda items.
Autumn said she has
So
October surprises.
Oh, that's true.
I have, we had a meeting with the Conservation Commission and the developers from the developer forum we did
Oh,
on
that's right.
environmental standards.
Yep.
And so the outcome of that was a much more streamlined version of some wetland setbacks for constructability.
Yep.
So I plan on bringing those in October.
Yep.
And then the Long Range Planning Committee is reviewing, they reviewed last month and they'll be reviewing again this Friday, a request for a food truck court, not
Yep.
mobile food trucks, but an actual place to allow them, similar to some areas that we have around here. And so that is under review with that group, and I anticipate that coming to Ordinance Committee
Yep.
in October as well.
Okay. Awesome. Anybody have anything else? I'm looking at Mr. Manager. Have you?
No.
No, nothing.
I hope not.
Well, you and I, October will be our last ordinance meeting. I know, look at this one. It's all on you, honey. No. All right. If there's nothing else. Motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor? Look, we got hands back there. Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you, everybody.